Time now for the press preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. Over the remainder of the hour, we'll be taking a look at the headlines with The Sun's deputy political editor, Ryan Sabey, and The Guardian columnist, Zoe Williams. Plenty for us to discuss, but let's run you through the front pages first. And we start with the Mirror. It leads with the New Year's honours list in a story that reports that more deserving candidates were snubbed in favour of Tory donors and supporters. A more positive story on the New Year's honours headlines the Mail, the focus on parents who've been recognised for turning the anguish of losing their children into campaigns for social justice. Here's the Eye, concerned with possible rail disruption in the new year, many staff refusing to do overtime as the prospect of renewed strikes looms. Guardian choosing to go with a report from a progressive think tank which says that public services, including the courts and the NHS, simply won't recover from excessive backlogs until at least the 2030s. The Sun says that Man City manager Pep Guardiola has warned his players not to flaunt their wealth on social media after England star Jack Grealish's home was burgled whilst he was playing. And the Star continuing a fine run this week, carrying the story about the benefits of beavers. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you can see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers whilst you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Ryan and Zoe. And look, there is only one place to start, because of course, while we have had the New Year's honours, we've also had Liz Truss's resignation honours announced. Front page of the Mirror sums up, well, one perspective on all of this. Heroes and zeros. And as we were discussing in the break, I suppose there are two things to say. One, there'll be plenty of people surprised that Liz Truss was given the opportunity to give these honours out. And two, that she took it. Ryan?
Yeah. I think most people will look at this when they see these headlines and just look at the sort of the sheer cheek that she's actually, you know, got a set of honours to give out. The 3 peerages in there, 8 lesser honours. And she was only in Downing Street for 49 days, and they'll be asking questions, why have these people got the honours and got the peerages, especially at a time where they blame her for that mini budget and also their mortgage costs going up. So I think there'll be sort of big questions asked about this. The government will come back and say, well, every Prime Minister is entitled to, you know, their resignation honours, and they'll point to people like Tom Watson or Shamik Chakrabarti for getting them. So there is argument in both sides, but I think just on the surface of this, I think people will be aggrieved.
I mean, they can make that argument. It doesn't mean that any of us have to believe it, because, of course, while she was entitled to them, I mean, she could have said no. She could have just pointed out, you know what, I wasn't doing the job for particularly long, didn't exactly end as I'd wanted it. You know, some people might feel this is cronyism.
There are basically 3 things going on. The first is that none of the rights she got on leaving office feel right to anybody, right? So that, you know, she got that payment, that 115,000 a year to run her personal office, which is for exiting prime ministers. And everybody was like, are you kidding me? You're a prime minister for under 50 days. Now this, again, she's kind of really milking it for everything it was worth when she wasn't worth anything like the office was worth. So there's that problem. The second problem is the actual nature of the people she's ennobled. You know, Mark Littlewood, who was the head of the IEA, was on the original list and didn't make the cut. But the other 3 are absolutely clear political allies. There's no attempt at kind of balance. There's no attempt to reflect the needs of the House of Lords. Obviously, electoral reform has suggested for a long time that there should be a 2 out, 1 in policy just to bring that chamber down a little bit. It's now over 800 people. So to see her, you know, essentially ennobling people who are parts of the Leave campaign, which a lot of people just think should be put behind us, is, again, really problematic. But, you know, if you're expecting Liz Truss to have some kind of class and say, no, thanks, but no thanks, I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, there's Liz Truss on the front page there, alongside a photo of John Griffin, awarded a gong after also awarding the Conservative Party £4 million. I mean, before we actually go through the list of who's been honoured, let's just hear from Liz Truss herself. And she said this: I am delighted these champions for the conservative causes of freedom, limited government and proud and sovereign Britain have been suitably honoured. Let's go inside the Mail and find out exactly who it is. I mean, who has leapt out to you? I mean, the first The first, the first guy that I'm spotting there is Weatherspoon's boss, Tim Martin, receiving a knighthood.
The funny thing about this is that he didn't actually donate that much to the Tory party,
No.
so it made me think it's actually a little bit cheaper than you'd think, because there are people here who've donated in the millions, but Tim Martin's donation was something more like 50,000, which, you know, he could easily have lost in a card game.
Presumably it was Brexit as much as anything else when it came to Mr Martin. Sorry, Sir Tim, I should say.
Well, Tim Martin, he's on the New Year's honours list, but then you've got the other three, the Vote Leave. There's a couple of Vote Leave, Matthew Elliott, John Moynihan, who also gave £20,000 to Liz Truss's leadership campaign. So again, that raises questions. And there's also a Deputy Chief of Staff who will also be going to the House of Lords. But it does bring into question, you know, if you are donating to political leaders, you know, does that tarnish any kind of award later on down the line?
I mean, doesn't it just give the opposition, you know, the opportunity to get a big old stick out and whack the government with it? You know, John Ashworth, Labour, this list is proof of Rishi Sunak's weakness. You know, Lib Dem Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper, Truss handing out gongs after blowing a hole in public finances, calls this whole honours system into disrepute. I mean, if ever there's going to be a national conversation about whether or not this is a proper thing for departing politicians to have in their gift.
There is certainly the case that very few things bring into relief just how many Conservative Prime Ministers there have been in the past 5 years, more than this, you know. It's like you sort of accept it as the new reality. They don't last very long, they're constantly in crisis. And then, as soon as you see the departing honours, you realise just how constitutionally unusual and destabilising it is.
And Labour were very keen to make the point early on that Rishi Sunak could have blocked this. Now, people in government are saying that this is just a matter of course that the former Prime Minister will have that chance to put forward their resignation honours. But they were making the point that this was a list of shame, and he should have come in to step back, go forward with the list.
But what do we make then of the timing of all of this? As we were hearing in our report just a second ago, you know, these names were submitted back in March, and so as you mentioned yourself, you know, we knew some of them because they were leaked out at that point.
I think mustn't we have thought that they would probably mostly be knocked back?
They were, but I think that in terms of the timing, I think it's very opportune. You've got the New Year's honours list, you've got, you know, the end of the year. People are thinking about New Year's Eve, they're in the middle of Christmas and all the celebrations and what goes on with that. So it's a very good opportunity for them to do it. If there was any point over the past 9 months or over the next few weeks to do it, this is the moment. You can move on with the new year, come what next week.
We'll bring in the FT at the moment, but Truss, 3 allies to the Lords after, you know, her 49-day term. But again, it's the idea that presumably conversations could have been had between Downing Street and Liz Truss, pointing out that perhaps now is not the time, maybe even pushing it further into the long grass. But is this just simply a political calculation about the fact we're going to have a general election next year?
What, did they basically thinking that what's the point having a reputation when we're...
well, that, if you're going to talk about this, if you're going to talk about it, do it this side of the new year. And I don't know, the amount of whiskey that goes down on Hogmanay, a few people might forget about it.
I mean, I think that's a kind of fine calculation. I mean, and when I say fine, I don't mean good.
Yeah.
The problem is they're going to go, depending on when the election lands, people will either be associating the Conservatives with their eye-wateringly expensive mortgages and rents, or if interest rates have come down, they're going to be associating them with cronyism. If the COVID inquiry is landing some results, they're going to be associated with mismanagement on that score. So they really don't have in their gift the perfect time to have an election when nobody will be talking about their problematic things.
These people could have turned them down.
That's
I think there was one person who said they were too embarrassed to be linked with the list, so they actually walked away from it.
Let's, though, dwell on the kind of the more positive aspect of that, which is just come out, had the embargo lifted on it. This is the front of the Daily Mail. Their headline, I think, you know, pretty accurate, actually, the most poignant honours of all. And these, of course, for the parents of, you know, Molly Russell and Joanna Simpson, who took their pain and did something positive with it, did something incredibly positive with it.
I mean, Ian Russell's work on internet safety was really, what was so extraordinary about it was not just that he found all that kind of campaigning vigour in such a distressing, awful time, but that he was actually quite, he was quite searching, he was quite challenging to massive companies, you know, like TikTok, like like Etsy, like people you do not expect to see challenge at this in a kind of forum of citizen campaigning, and I think he has made an impact. I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I was with Ian Russell yesterday. I was in the Cabinet Office when we were sort of preparing for the coverage today. So impressive, but he's actually thinking about the next stage already in this campaign. He's also looking at the regulator, the now formal regulator, Ofcom, and saying they've now got to have teeth to step in if social media platforms, step over the mark, and talk about working with the tech firms. So, to take down that harmful content. So he's not letting up just because he's got this honour.
And also, what's so interesting about that is that, there's a lot of lobbying goes on between tech firms and MPs, and you don't see that kind of campaigning zeal from elected MPs, but you do see it from citizens. Sorry, I said Etsy before, and I didn't mean Etsy, I meant Pinterest, so I don't want to slur them.
You're fine. Thank you for that clarification. Welcome back to the press preview. Ryan and Zoe still here. And Zoe, we'll give you the honours, given it's your paper. The lead for The Guardian. The courts and the NHS, not just, in fact, actually, but we'll start with those, not in a position of not recovering, for the best part of a decade.
The best part of a decade, for sure. I mean, they're talking about the 2030s, and they don't necessarily say the early 2030s. Now, the thing is that the courts and the NHS, they're quite easy backlogs to measure because they count their backlogs. But things like the number of councils falling over and going bankrupt,
oh dear,
that's going to be massive as well. That's going to take years to recover. And what I think this reflects is there is a lot of conversation in and around Labour about establishing some kind of doomsday document which says we've popped the hood on all the things that went wrong in the last 13 years, and it's much worse than you think, and this is the mountain we've got to climb. Now, they have to land that really, really fast, because otherwise they're going to get stuck with a huge amount of chaos that was actually created by the austerity years and then later by the kind of distractions of Brexit. So they have to land it, but they also have to not campaign on it, because if they go into an election saying everything's going to be terrible for ages, that's not a great look.
Well, isn't the point? I mean, that's in paragraph 3, when Harry Quilter-Pinner, the IPPR director, said that, if we're going to sort this out, reform and higher spending are going to be needed, and that's the stick that's always used to beat Labour come election time.
And that's the trouble. There isn't much spending. So every time we've had a financial statement, whether it's been the autumn statement or it's been a budget, Jeremy Hunt has had limited headroom to play with. So, and there's going to be some traps set by the Conservatives going into that next election. That they've lowered national insurance. They're probably going to lower some sort of maybe income tax, possibly at the budget. So as soon as Labour gets in, do they raise them or do they not? Yeah. Do they want to fall into that trap straight away of raising taxes?
And I think, actually, when you look at this, because this is part of an IPPR report called Great Government, and they do have some ideas. They've got ideas in the kind of tax raising space. They've got ideas in the spending reduction space. And it's quite kite-flyy. One of the ideas is that they bring in ChatGPT to run some public sector literature, which would save 24 billion. Now, I think 24 billion sounds toppy for how much that would save, and I also think that sounds like quite a long-term project. So, it's quite easy when you're the IPPR to say things which are a little bit more out there than the actual Labour Party.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I do want to get our final story in the front of the Eye Weekend, and a story quite close to my heart because I'm supposed to be heading off in a couple of days myself. The rail chaos. Because, in part, you've got the weather, but you've also got these strikes as well, the threat in some areas.
Yeah, it seems like every time, you try and get on a train, there's, I got the train in this morning, and, there was staff that are not turning up to work, there was trains being cancelled, sort of left, right and centre. You look along the board and, there's barely a train running. I don't think people would mind if they pay for, when you're paying good money for a service, that you can actually get a seat. If you're going on that long journey, you're not standing in the aisle for hours upon hours. The catering, work.
But there you have the third kind of bullet point there. Ministers warn they will hold operators to account if they let passengers down. Where have they been?
Right, yeah.
Where have they been for quite some time now when it comes to the rail network in this country?
Well, basically, the ministerial response to all industrial action, and indeed all industrial relations, has been if you ignore them, they'll go away. I mean, I remember speaking to the head of the Royal College of Nurses, who couldn't get into a room with the relevant minister for nearly 9 months after she took the post. So, it is testament, I think, to the sort of crumbling government and crumbling spirit of government that ministers say these sabre-rattling things, but they don't really have have any recourse if the strikes go ahead.
And you think the passengers and those people who use the trains just want ministers to, get the train operating companies to grab everything, by the neck. ASLEF is still, threatening strike action well into next year. They said they'll do it, up until the election or so. So, it just needs, people to get into the room and actually thrash it out.
But just in general, of course, this is going to be exacerbated. We've only got 30 seconds, but it's going to be exacerbated by the weather. And every year, for a handful of years that I can remember now, there have been problems when it comes to so-called public transport.
But is this not quite unprecedented? I mean, it does look worse than normal between the sort of hurricanes in Blackpool and the amazingly heavy rain. You go to Scotland?
It rained an awful lot over Christmas. Yeah, sorry.
So I don't know whether we're kind of looking at a climate change effect, which actually is going to make the industrial action seem like relatively small fry if trains are getting knocked off the rails.
But hey, at least it gives us the opportunity to do that which the British love most, talk about the weather.